Glad that you're back with us for another edition of Morning Bible Study. And for those of you who don't watch it live in the morning, that is absolutely okay. We're here for you any time of the day, as these are archived on Facebook, and now they are archived on YouTube as well. So feel free to stick with us and catch up if you have to. If you get behind, it's not a big deal. I'm just glad that you're spending time in God's Word, and I'm also glad that you're spending time with us. I do read the comments, and I actually love it whenever you share these. And I really love it whenever you comment live that you're here or post any questions that you might have along the way. And if I'm able to handle them live, they pop up here on my screen, and I'll handle them if I see them. And if we have time to get to them, or if not, I'll handle it after the fact in the comment or chat feed. And so today we are continuing in our study on looking at places where Jesus speaks to us outside of the Gospels. As we've said, Jesus speaks throughout the entirety of the Bible, but especially in the New Testament, in the letters of Paul and continuing on through Hebrews and Revelation, we see Jesus continuing to speak even though he has ascended into heaven. And this week we are taking a look at the 7 letters to the church in the first few chapters of Revelation. And so Jesus speaks to the church in those days through the writer John. And we believe also that Jesus has something to say to us as well through those things. And so before we get into that, though, just a reminder, if you're not on our email list, you can go to kmyoung.com/sign up and put your name on that list. But I sent out an email on Saturday night that had information about some really exciting things that are coming up that I'd love for you to be a part of and attending. And if you did not get that email, then I want to make sure that you send me a message at kevin@kmyoung.com. Let me know that you didn't get that email, and then I'll make sure to forward it to you. Sometimes spam filters catch these things. And so feel free to send me an email there, and I'll make sure that you get it so you can be a part of what's coming up. Not this weekend, but coming up next weekend on the 21st and the 22nd, and we'll be glad to have you be a part of that. But this morning we are in Revelation chapter 2, and we're continuing on. Yesterday we were in verses 1 through 7. Today we're in verses 8, 9, 10, and 11 for a letter to the next church in Asia Minor. And so here we go. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it. The John actually receives this message: write this letter to the angel of the church in Smyrna. Smyrna was second only really to Ephesus, and was actually a much more beautiful town during these days than Ephesus was. And so you may never have heard of the city, but in those days, it was a very important city that was actually famous for a golden street that came from the temple of Zeus in Smyrna. And so in the ancient world, this was a very important city. And this is the message from the one who is the first and the last. That's a reference to Jesus, who is dead, but is now alive. And so we know that what's about to be said here is a message from Jesus himself. So again, Jesus speaks not just in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Gospels, but Jesus speaks throughout the Bible. And here we have Jesus about to give a message in particular to this church. Verse 9, Jesus says, I know about your suffering and your poverty, but you're rich. I know the blasphemy of those opposing you. They say they're Jews, but they're not, because their synagogue belongs to Satan. Strong words there from Jesus. Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. The devil will throw some of you into prison to test you. You will suffer for 10 days, but if you remain faithful, even when facing death, I will give you the crown of life. Anyone with ears to hear must listen to the Spirit and understand what he is saying to the churches. Whoever is victorious will not be harmed by the second death. And so this one is clearly a very particular message for a very particular church, in that there are a lot of specifics that are given here. For instance, Jesus says, I know about your suffering and your poverty, but you are rich. Now, Smyrna, think about it, a street of gold, was a very rich city. But the Christians in that city were not. Why were the Christians in a very rich context not wealthy themselves? Likely because of oppression, because of the suffering. Perhaps their businesses were not supported financially by the community because they knew that they were Christians. And so lots of oppression that's going on there. But Jesus says, even though you are suffering and even though you may be financially poor, you are rich. Now, this is a matter of perspective, in that how we view ourselves really determines the outcome. Does that make sense? What Jesus is saying here is you kind of have you have a choice as to how you can view your circumstances. You can view your circumstances through the eyes of the world's lens, which is a lens that is one where perhaps peace means you're doing well and wealth means you're happy, or you can view it through the lens of your spiritual lens, where even though you may not have peace because there's suffering, and even though you may not be wealthy because of the oppression of those around you, but the reason for both of those things is because you're spiritually strong and spiritually centered. And so because of that, you're rich. You see, in God's economy, dollars and cents, to bring it into an American context, dollars and cents does not necessarily make one rich. There are more important things in which you can be rich. You can have all the money in the world and not be happy. For many people, it's their families that make them rich. It's their health that makes them rich, and yet they may be poor. And Jesus is saying, I look at you and I see you as being rich. And Jesus says, I want you to know that I see the opposition. I see the blasphemy that's going on around you. I want you to know that you're not suffering and enduring this alone. Now, think about that, because whenever we go through trials, whenever trouble comes into our life, whenever you're facing something, maybe it's financial, maybe it's something relational, maybe what you're facing is something that is personal or psychological, maybe mental or emotional. You begin to get into the trap of isolating yourself, and then we begin to believe, and sometimes rightly so, that no one else can see or understand what we're going through, which causes further isolation. And so we pull inward inside of ourselves, and that can become destructive in those situations and those circumstances where we most need people to be around us and to be with us. We can be alone or feel alone. And Jesus says, you're not alone. I see it. And especially when there are other people who are targeting you, this happens a lot in the Psalms. David writes about this, about his enemies, and about how people are targeting him and blaspheming him, and they're warring against him, and he feels as though he's losing because no one is taking his side. Jesus says here, I see everything that's going on here, and I see those who are opposing you. And if God sees it, you can count on the fact that God is going to set that right at some time. He's going to do it on his timetable and in his way, which means that it may seem for a while that those who are opposing you, those who are evil, those who are sinning, are winning, but sin never wins. Write that down. Sin never wins. Sinning is never winning. This is especially difficult to understand and to handle when it is religious people who are doing it. Whenever it's coming from within a religious institution. Many of us know what that feels like, to be targeted, to be blasphemed, to be lied about, to be hated, to be sidelined by a religious community whenever we were doing the right thing. But because we were doing the right thing, that pointed out the faults in other people. And so they did this and pushed you away. It should never be that way. God sees that. Jesus sees that. And that's exactly what's going on right here. See what happens? They say they're Jews, but they're not. So the people who were opposing them said that they were religious and that they were following God. Now, clearly as Jews, they weren't following Jesus, but they still were religious. They were still following God. They said they're Jews, but Jesus says these people, not only are they not Christians, but they're not even Jews. They didn't make it to the second step to the Messiah. They didn't even make it to the first step, which is really being on the lookout for the Messiah. Jesus says because they're in a synagogue of Satan. Think about that language from Jesus, a synagogue of Satan. If one of us were to say that or put that in print or a letter somewhere, like it not go over well. Jesus is calling them a synagogue of Satan. I think there are churches where Jesus would say the same thing. There are religious people whom Jesus would say, they say they are, and just insert Christian for the word Jew. They say they're a Christian, but they're not. They say they're a Christ-centered community, but they're not, because their church belongs to the devil. Many of us know those churches. They've come to your mind. I'm going to ask you to resist the urge to post it in the comments. In fact, I looked here. Loretta, I see you writing "been there." I don't know if that was a comment to the church or if it's a comment about suffering, but either way, let's all hold off on naming names or of religious institutions. But you know what? For many of us, faces popped into our mind. Church name or building popped into our mind in that moment. And it shouldn't be that way. And in this letter, Jesus says, they're not mine. They may have my name on their building, but it belongs to someone else. The evil one. And that is a travesty. Jesus says, you know what? Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. Maybe to you, he's saying, don't be afraid of what you are suffering, or go ahead and heal from what you did suffer. The devil's going to throw some of you into prison to test you. Some of you are in prisons of your own mind, of your own heart, of your own religious institutions or beliefs. Some of us are in literal prisons around the world, and many more of us are in figurative prisons because of religious institutions of the devil. But Jesus says to remain faithful even when facing death, and I will give you the crown of life. This health and wealth gospel where it's always, up and getting better. True Christianity is one where we suffer. Not rightly, of course, but it's one where we suffer. Because Jesus suffered, and he said, when you follow me, truly you will too. And so if you're suffering, you can know that you're on the right path. And so what's he calling this church to? Well, he's calling this church in Smyrna to faithful endurance, is what I would say. To faithfully endure whatever comes when those things come because of their faithfulness to Jesus Christ. And I think he's not just saying that to the church of Smyrna. I think he's saying that to whatever prison you may find yourself in, or whatever suffering you may be going through or facing. He is calling you and I simply to faithful endurance, not to joy in the midst of suffering, not to try to avoid whatever it is that may come, not to throw ourselves willingly, fatalistically, masochistically into the suffering. We don't want harm to come. We're not those kinds of people, but to faithful endurance. It was in this church in Smyrna a few years after this letter was written by Jesus to the church there, where Polycarp, a bishop, essentially was forced to either renounce Christ or die. They said, "Say Caesar is Lord, or be burned at the stake." The suffering got really tough in Smyrna in the years ahead after this letter. Polycarp said, "I will not say that Caesar is Lord because I do not believe it." So Polycarp was tied to a stake. And history tells us that it was the Jewish people of that synagogue that Jesus called the synagogue of Satan who actually brought the wood to the fire. Now, I have to say that I know many, many wonderful Jews, and some of my best friends are Jews. But I know many, many wonderful Christians as well, and many of my best friends are Christians, and yet there are still some Christians who I believe are closer to Satan than they are to Christ. And perhaps some Jews as well. And these particular Jewish people in this particular city who were part of this particular synagogue, history tells us were a part of burning Polycarp at the stake, because of his faithful endurance. Now, I'm not certain that being burnt at the stake for not renouncing your faith in Jesus Christ is going to be what you are called to faithfully endure. And I don't necessarily want to say that what you are going to faithfully endure isn't as difficult or as terrible as that. I don't want to demean what you're going through. But you're going to go through something in your following of Jesus. And you're going to have a choice as to whether to faithfully endure or live a life of mediocre followership of Jesus. The Church of Smyrna will forever be remembered as a church that, to the very end, whatever may came, faithfully endured. And I hope that that will be your story as well. That whatever you face, whatever you're called to, whatever comes into your life that you did not ask for and do not deserve, that you too will make a choice to faithfully endure, and that, like Polycarp, thousands of years later, stories will be told of your heroic endurance, even to the point of death. That's all the time that we have for today. I hope that this has been meaningful to you. Don't forget, shoot me an email at kevin@kmyoung.com. If you did not receive the email over the weekend and want to make sure to get it, then I'll forward it to you. But until tomorrow, happy reading.